The ballroom of the Plaza Hotel shimmered under golden chandeliers that looked like floating crowns. Laughter and clinking champagne glasses echoed off the marble floors. Every guest there wore power like perfume. Men in tailored suits, women in glittering Dior gowns, and Grace Whitmore in a pale blue maternity dress, holding her belly as if it were her only armor. Her husband, Ethan Vale, stood across the room with his assistant, Sienna Brooks. Grace had heard the whispers before. The late nights, the text messages that stopped when she walked in, the cold shoulder at breakfast. But tonight, seeing them together, the truth wasn't whispered anymore. It was flaunted under crystal light. Sienna laughed too loud, her manicured fingers tracing Ethan's sleeve as if to claim him. Grace tried to stay calm. She was 7 months pregnant and her doctor had warned any shock could trigger contractions. She took a slow breath and stepped closer, her heels trembling beneath her. "Ethan," she called softly. Heads turned. Ethan froze for a second, then forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Grace," he said, his tone dry, "you shouldn't be here." "I had to," she whispered. "You haven't answered my calls for 2 days." Sienna rolled her eyes, her lips curling in disdain. "Oh, please, don't make a scene," she said. "You're embarrassing him." Grace's heart thudded. "Embarrassing him?" She repeated. "He's my husband." The room went still. Guests pretended not to watch, but their curiosity crackled in the air. Ethan's hand tightened on his glass. "Grace," he muttered, "let's not do this here." But Sienna stepped forward, her smile sharpening like broken glass. "You really don't get it, do you?" she hissed. "He's with me now. You're just—" The sound came before the words finished. Smack! Gasps sliced through the music. The echo of Sienna's palm against Grace's cheek filled the hall. Grace's head snapped to the side, her hair falling loose. For a moment she didn't move. Her face burned, her heart raced, the world swayed. Ethan didn't rush to her. He didn't even flinch. Instead he gave a small, almost amused smile, and a short, cruel laugh. "She had it coming," he said. That laughter broke something inside her. Grace felt the baby shift violently, a sharp pain cutting through her stomach. Someone whispered, "Is she okay?" But no one stepped forward. Phones lifted, cameras recorded. The humiliation was now eternal. Grace stumbled, clutching her belly. Blood stained her light dress, spreading like ink. Sienna backed away, startled now, not by guilt but by fear of scandal. And Ethan? He just stood there, watching until the ballroom doors opened. A sudden hush fell. Security men in dark suits cleared a path. A tall, silver-haired man entered, eyes like winter steel. Everyone recognized him. The billionaire no one expected to see. Grace turned weakly toward him, whispering through tears, "Dad?" And that was the moment the entire room realized. Hell had just arrived wearing a tailored suit. The sound of her own heartbeat drowned everything else. Grace Whitmore stood frozen under the chandeliers, one hand gripping her swollen belly, the other touching her burning cheek. The slap still rang in her ears. Around her, people whispered, pretending to care while secretly filming. Champagne glasses trembled in their hands, not from sympathy but anticipation. Sienna Brooks stood tall beside Ethan, her red lips twisted into satisfaction. "You see?" she whispered loudly enough for the nearest tables to hear. "That's what happens when you don't know your place." Grace's throat tightened. "My place?" she repeated softly, her voice cracking. She could taste iron on her tongue. "My place is with my husband." Ethan exhaled like a man annoyed by noise. "Grace, please," he said, rubbing his temple, "don't turn this into drama." That word, drama, stabbed deeper than the slap. Grace blinked rapidly, her vision blurring. "You watched her hit me," she said, shaking. "You laughed." Ethan's smile was cold. "You're emotional. You always twist things." A ripple of awkward laughter passed through the crowd. Grace wanted to scream, but her voice came out as a whisper. "I'm pregnant with your child." Sienna stepped closer, her perfume sweet and suffocating. "Then maybe focus on being a mother," she sneered, "because you clearly failed at being a wife." That did it. Grace's knees buckled. The pain in her abdomen sharpened, like something tearing inside. Her breath came short, fast. She stumbled backward, her back hitting the corner of a table. A glass toppled, spilling champagne that mixed with the blood now trickling down her thigh. Someone gasped, "She's bleeding!" But no one moved. Fear of involvement, fear of scandal, kept every manicured hand glued to crystal stemware. Grace's mind blurred. The light above her fractured into dozens of halos. She could still hear Ethan saying something, his voice distant, detached. "You're fine. Stop exaggerating." Her world tilted. She could feel the baby shift violently, a desperate movement inside her. Her hands trembled as she tried to steady herself. "Breathe, Grace. Please, for the baby." "Ethan," she whispered. "Help me." He didn't. He just stared, lips pressed into a thin line, a man cornered by embarrassment, not love. The pain spread, waves crashing from her stomach to her back. Grace's breathing turned into sobs. The sound made a few guests finally step forward, but too late. Her body gave way. She collapsed onto the polished marble floor, the sound of her fall echoing louder than the slap that started it all. "Call an ambulance," someone shouted. Sienna panicked, hiding behind Ethan. "She's faking it," she cried. "She just wants attention." But Grace's body was trembling uncontrollably now. Her eyes rolled slightly, catching flashes of gold ceiling, blurred faces, glittering jewelry. Everything looked unreal, like a cruel dream she couldn't wake from. Then, warmth, hands on her shoulders, a woman's voice close to her ear. "Grace, it's okay. Don't move. I'm here." It was Lydia Monroe, her old nurse, the only person who had stayed in touch after the miscarriage 2 years ago. Lydia knelt beside her, pulling off her shawl to press against the blood spreading on Grace's dress. "Stay with me," Lydia whispered. "Breathe slow. Help is coming." Grace blinked through tears. "Ethan," he laughed. "I know, sweetheart. I saw everything." Lydia's tone hardened. "And he's going to pay for it." Grace's vision dimmed. She could barely hear the murmurs around her, the confusion, the guilt, the click of phone cameras stopping. For the first time, silence filled the ballroom. Then, over the silence, came heavy footsteps, slow, certain, powerful, the kind that made people step aside without knowing why. Lydia turned her head toward the sound. Her eyes widened. Grace felt a shadow fall across her body. Someone knelt beside her, their voice calm, firm, and trembling with controlled rage. "Who did this to you?" Grace opened her eyes. Through the blur, she saw him. Her father, Charles Whitmore, staring at Ethan Vale as if the air itself had turned to fire. And in that frozen moment, every person in the room realized this wasn't just a scandal anymore. This was judgment walking in human form. The golden ballroom had turned into chaos. Grace Whitmore was rushed out through a side door, Lydia gripping her hand as if holding her together by sheer will. The crowd parted like water around them, some pretending to be concerned, others whispering, their phones still recording. Ethan didn't follow. He stayed back, muttering excuses to reporters, desperate to salvage his image before the story spun out of control. Inside the marble restroom of the Plaza Hotel, Grace leaned against the counter, gasping. Her reflection in the mirror looked like a stranger, pale skin, swollen eyes, mascara streaked down her cheeks. A faint handprint burned across her face. She looked both fragile and furious, a woman on the edge of breaking. Lydia tore open the emergency medical kit from her bag. "Sit," she ordered. "You're losing too much blood." Grace obeyed, lowering herself onto the cool tile floor. The pain was still sharp, but the worst of the bleeding had slowed. Lydia dabbed at the wound gently, muttering, "It's not deep. The baby's heartbeat is okay. You need a hospital soon." Grace's voice trembled. "He laughed, Lydia. When she hit me, he laughed." Lydia's eyes darkened. "I know. The whole world will see it soon." Grace frowned, confused. Lydia pulled out her phone and showed the recording she had secretly taken. It captured everything: Sienna's slap, Ethan's smirk, Grace's collapse. "I sent a copy to a secure drive," Lydia said. "He can't delete it, no matter what he tries." Grace shook her head in disbelief. "Why would he do that?" "I gave up everything for him. My career, my independence, even my father's name." "Because you made him feel small," Lydia said softly. "Men like him can't stand women who shine brighter." Grace wiped her tears, breathing unevenly. She remembered how Ethan used to look at her, admiring her confidence, her kindness, her mind. Somewhere along the way, that admiration had turned to resentment. "I thought I was helping him build something real," she whispered. "Instead, I was just building his ego." Lydia's tone softened. "You need to tell your father everything now. He's here, Grace. He's furious, but he's here." Grace's heart tightened. "He doesn't even know I married Ethan for love. He warned me. I ignored him." "Then tell him the truth," Lydia said. "It's the only way to end this." For a long moment, Grace just stared at her reflection. The woman staring back didn't look like a victim anymore. There was exhaustion, yes, but also something else: resolve. She stood, slowly, gripping the sink for balance. "Help me fix my hair," she said. "If I'm going to face him, and everyone else, I won't do it looking like a broken woman." Lydia smiled faintly and brushed Grace's tangled hair, tucking the loose strands behind her ears. "You're stronger than you think." When Grace stepped out of the restroom, the hallway was silent. Security guards lined the corridor, and through the open doors of the ballroom she saw her father, Charles Whitmore, speaking to hotel management. His expression was carved from ice. Ethan stood nearby, trying to explain himself, his face pale beneath the bright lights. Grace took a deep breath. Every step toward that room felt heavier, but also steadier. The fear that had paralyzed her moments ago was gone. Now there was only clarity, cold, unshakable. She walked past the guests, past the whispers, past Ethan's shocked stare. Her father turned toward her, relief flickering through his stern composure. "Grace," he said softly, reaching for her hand, but she stopped him. "Dad, don't, not yet." Her voice didn't shake. "There's something I need to say to him first." Ethan opened his mouth, but the words never came. Grace's eyes locked on his, calm but lethal. "You didn't just betray me," she said quietly. "You betrayed the family you never even deserved to be part of." The crowd watched in silence. Lydia stood in the doorway, recording again, not for revenge this time, but for proof. And when Grace lifted her chin, bruised yet unbroken, everyone knew. This wasn't the end of humiliation. This was the beginning of reckoning. Before the slap, before the blood, before the betrayal that shattered her heart, there had been love. Or what Grace Whitmore thought was love. 3 years earlier, she met Ethan Vale on a rainy Tuesday in downtown San Francisco. She was still working long shifts as a medical resident, exhausted and half-soaked from running through the storm. He offered her his umbrella and that trademark smile, warm, confident, a little reckless. "You look like you save lives," he joked. She laughed for the first time that day. He seemed different from the men in her father's world. Ethan wasn't born rich. He'd built his own small real estate firm, or so he said, and he spoke about ambition with fire in his eyes. Grace admired that. She had spent her life surrounded by billionaires who measured success in yachts and stock tickers. Ethan measured it in dreams. They started seeing each other constantly. Late-night dinners at small cafes, weekend hikes along the cliffs in Marin. He told her he loved her simplicity. She told him she loved his drive. Within months, they moved in together. Her father, Charles Whitmore, had been furious. "You don't know this man," he warned. "He's charming because he wants something." But Grace had grown up under security guards, reporters, and luxury she never asked for. Ethan made her feel normal. When she cooked pasta for him in their tiny apartment, he looked at her as if she were worth more than her family's fortune. "You're all I need," he whispered once, kissing her forehead. She believed him. They married in a small ceremony in Napa Valley, a vineyard sunset, white roses, just a handful of friends. Ethan promised her a life of partnership, not wealth. "We'll build everything together," he said, slipping a silver ring onto her finger instead of diamonds. It felt pure, real. Then, slowly, reality shifted. The first crack came when his company started struggling. Grace noticed his phone calls grew longer, his smile tighter. "Just investors," he'd say. But his nights grew later, and the warmth between them turned to distance. When Grace discovered she was pregnant, she thought it would bring them back together. She imagined Ethan holding her belly, whispering to the baby, planning names. But instead, he grew more distracted. He said things like, "A baby will slow everything down," or "You should rest, don't worry about finances." He took over her credit cards, just to manage things better, he claimed. She didn't protest. She trusted him. Then came the assistant, Sienna Brooks, young, brilliant, always by his side. Grace met her once at a company dinner. Sienna was polite but cold, the kind of woman who smiled while sizing you up. "Your husband's vision is impressive," she said, eyes glinting. Grace had smiled back, though something in her chest ached. Within weeks, Ethan's clothes smelled faintly of Sienna's perfume. He claimed it was from shared car rides to meetings. Grace wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. But one night, when she opened his laptop, she found photos from a business trip to Miami. Sienna by the pool, Ethan's hand resting on her leg. That night, Grace cried quietly beside the crib she had ordered online, tracing her hand over the soft white wood. She told herself it was just a a phase, a midlife panic. She'd seen her parents survive worse. But deep down, she knew something was breaking. Still, she stayed, because she was pregnant, because she wanted her child to have a family, because love, once blind, had turned into a cage she didn't know how to leave. She didn't tell her father. She didn't tell anyone. She wore long sleeves to hide the bruises of exhaustion, not violence. She smiled at charity events beside Ethan, convincing everyone, and herself, that everything was fine. But standing there in that bathroom at the Plaza Hotel, staring into her bruised reflection, she finally saw the truth her father had seen from the start. Ethan never wanted a partner. He wanted a trophy he could break without consequence. The change didn't happen overnight. It was slow, almost invisible at first, like a crack spreading under fresh paint. Grace Whitmore could pinpoint the moment Ethan Vale started to slip away, but not the reason. Maybe it was when his first big project failed, or when investors pulled out, or when he realized her last name, Whitmore, carried more power than his entire company ever could. In the beginning, Ethan had been grateful. He used to kiss her hands after long days and tell her, "You're my luck." But when the market turned and his deals collapsed, that gratitude curdled into resentment. "You don't understand what pressure is," he snapped one night, pacing their living room. "You've never had to fight for anything." Grace had blinked, stunned. She'd spent her life working 12-hour hospital shifts, dealing with dying patients, earning every title without her father's help. But Ethan didn't want truth. He wanted pity. It became a pattern. Every failure was her fault. Every argument ended with her apologizing. When she tried to talk about the baby, he changed the subject to money. "We can't afford to slow down now," he'd say. "I need investors, not diapers." That's when he started bringing Sienna Brooks everywhere. Meetings, lunches, even charity events. "She's efficient," he told Grace. "You could learn something from her." Grace felt herself fading from his world. Her clothes hung looser. Her phone barely rang. He kept her occupied with doctor's appointments and nursery planning, while he spent nights working late. When she asked about the company's finances, he brushed her off. "Let me handle it. You just focus on the baby." She didn't know he was already mortgaging their apartment to cover debts. The more desperate Ethan became, the more he blamed her. He stopped touching her gently. The kisses turned mechanical, the compliments rare. Once, when she told him she missed how things used to be, he muttered, "People grow up, Grace. Maybe you should too." It was a slap without the sound. Sienna's influence spread like perfume, subtle but suffocating. Grace overheard them whispering once on the phone. Sienna said, "She's holding you back. If you want the board to take you seriously, you can't keep dragging a housewife around." Ethan didn't argue. Grace wanted to hate Sienna, but she couldn't. Her anger had no place to go. She blamed herself. Maybe if she'd been less emotional, less tired, less pregnant, maybe he'd still look at her the same way. But one night, everything cracked open. Grace woke at 2 a.m. to find Ethan gone. His phone was on the counter, still glowing. She shouldn't have looked, but she did. Messages flashed across the screen. "Sienna, he's asleep next to her, right? Ethan, don't worry. Soon she'll be gone." Her chest tightened until she couldn't breathe. She dropped the phone, trembling. Gone. The word echoed in her head. Gone could mean divorce, or worse. The next morning, Ethan acted normal, humming as he made coffee. Grace tried to speak but couldn't. The fear sat heavy in her throat. He kissed her forehead on his way out and said, "Don't stress, it's bad for the baby." She realized then how cruel his calmness was. He didn't love her. He didn't even see her. She was a contract, a stepping stone toward the life he thought he deserved. That was when she stopped hoping. She didn't pack her bags or confront him. Instead, she started to prepare quietly. She reconnected with Lydia, the only person she trusted. She gathered documents, receipts, phone records, just in case. Grace no longer wanted to save her marriage. She wanted to survive it. And when Ethan invited her to that grand gala at the Plaza Hotel weeks later, pretending it was for public image, she knew something inside him had died completely. What she didn't know was that something inside her had awakened too, and it would be the thing that destroyed him. The morning of the gala began with sunlight streaming through the penthouse windows, soft and golden, falling across a breakfast table set for two. But only one plate was touched. Grace Whitmore sat there pushing scrambled eggs around with her fork, her stomach twisting. Ethan Vale stood near the mirror, straightening his tie. He looked flawless, charcoal suit, gold cufflinks, hair slicked back just so. From a distance, he could still pass for the man she'd once loved. Up close, he looked like a stranger rehearsing a role. "Ethan," she began quietly, "you forgot we have the doctor's appointment this morning." He didn't look up. "I rescheduled. The gala's tonight. Investors are flying in from London. I can't skip it." "You rescheduled without telling me?" she said. "I'm 7 months pregnant, Ethan. It's not just about you anymore." He turned, eyes cold. "Don't start, Grace. You've been moody for weeks. Maybe talk to your therapist about it." She blinked. "My therapist?" He smirked, pouring coffee into a porcelain cup. "You remember Dr. Klein? I called him. Told him you've been overwhelmed. He'll fit you in next week." Her hand tightened on the table. "You called my therapist behind my back?" "I'm trying to help you," he said, sipping the coffee. "You're emotional. You cry at everything. People are starting to notice. I can't have you causing scenes in public again." The word again stung. "I've never caused a scene, Ethan. You're the one who disappears for nights, who lies about where you are." He chuckled, a sound that no longer resembled humor. "You really want to do this now?" Grace rose, her breathing uneven. "Last night you said the gala was just business. Why is Sienna listed as your +1? He froze. Just for a second, his mask slipped. Then he laughed it off. "She organized the event, Grace. Don't be insecure." "I'm your wife," she said sharply. "If someone should stand beside you tonight, it's me." He set his cup down slowly. "Fine, come if you must, but don't embarrass me." The words sliced her open. "Embarrass you? I'm carrying your child, Ethan." He met her gaze, voice low and cruel. "Then act like it. Stop clinging to me every time you feel neglected." She swallowed the tears burning behind her eyes. For a moment she saw herself from the outside, a pregnant woman begging for crumbs of affection from a man who saw her as a nuisance. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. He turned back to the mirror, adjusting his tie again. "Because I'm tired of pretending, Grace. You were supposed to make life easier, not harder. You're weak. You can't even handle pregnancy without turning it into a tragedy." Her breath hitched. "You think I'm weak?" He looked at her reflection. "Prove me wrong." Grace stepped closer, trembling. "One day, you're going to regret every word you've said to me." Ethan's eyes flicked to hers in the mirror. "The only thing I'll regret is not leaving sooner." Silence, heavy, final. She turned away, clutching her stomach as if holding the last piece of herself together. Her voice shook but didn't break. "If I come tonight, it won't be for you." He laughed softly. "Then why?" Grace looked over her shoulder. "Because I want to see what kind of man laughs when Karma walks into the room." Ethan frowned, confused. What's that supposed to mean? But she was already walking toward the bedroom, closing the door behind her. For the first time, she didn't cry. She just stared out the window at the gray Manhattan skyline, her reflection ghosted over the glass. She didn't know it yet, but that argument, their last as husband and wife, would echo through the ballroom that night like a curse come true. And by the end of that evening, Ethan Vale would learn exactly what it meant when Karma walked through the door. By the time evening arrived, the Plaza Hotel glittered like a palace. Chauffeurs lined up under the awning, their black cars gleaming beneath the Manhattan lights. The city buzzed with energy, but inside Grace Whitmore's chest was nothing but stillness, a silence made of fear and exhaustion. She stepped out of the car carefully, her pale silk gown clinging to her 7-month belly. Lydia Monroe, her old nurse, steadied her arm. "You don't have to go in," Lydia whispered. Grace's eyes fixed on the golden doors. "Yes, I do. He invited me for a reason. I need to know what it is." Inside, music floated through the grand ballroom, violins, laughter, champagne fizzing in crystal flutes. Ethan Vale was already there, radiant under the chandeliers, shaking hands with investors and smiling that smile she once fell for. Beside him, Sienna Brooks gleamed in a scarlet dress that looked painted on. She leaned in too close when he spoke, touching his arm like she owned it. Grace's breath caught. Her heart wanted to flee, but her pride anchored her feet. Lydia touched her shoulder gently. "I'll be nearby," she said, slipping into the crowd. As Grace made her way toward the bar, conversation stilled. Eyes turned. The whispers started again, about the pregnant wife, the rumors, the betrayal. Her cheeks flushed, but she forced herself to stand tall. They can look all they want, she thought. I'm not the one who should be ashamed. When Ethan finally noticed her, his smile faltered for half a second. Then, as if nothing had happened, he raised his glass. Grace, he said smoothly. You made it. Her voice was steady. You asked me to. He guided her toward a group of men in tailored suits. Gentlemen, this is my wife, Grace Whitmore. She's been feeling under the weather, but I insisted she come. Under the weather. That's what he called the sleepless nights. The bleeding, the loneliness. Grace smiled faintly, hiding her rage. Sienna appeared behind Ethan, her perfume announcing her before her words did. Oh, Grace, she said sweetly, you look so brave. Grace met her eyes. And you look so uninvited. The men chuckled awkwardly, shifting their drinks. Ethan shot Grace a warning glance, but she ignored it. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of his anger. Then, the host tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Ethan Vale, CEO of Vale Developments. Applause filled the room. Ethan released Grace's hand and stepped onto the small stage. His speech began smoothly. Numbers, vision, promises. But Grace barely heard him. Her mind replayed his words from that morning. You're weak. Prove me wrong. She looked around the room, realizing this event wasn't a business gala. It was a performance. He wanted investors to see him as powerful, untouchable. Grace's presence was part of the act, the loyal wife, smiling for the cameras. Sienna joined him on stage halfway through, laughing into the microphone as she presented a new corporate partnership. The audience clapped politely. Ethan wrapped an arm around her waist, too long, too familiar. The photographers caught it instantly. Grace's hands shook. Her vision blurred with humiliation and disbelief. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was annihilation of her dignity. She tried to step back, but a wave of dizziness hit. The pain returned, sharp and low. Lydia, watching from across the room, started moving toward her. Before she could reach her, Sienna descended the stage and approached, smirking. Don't look so shocked, she whispered. Men like Ethan need women who can actually keep up. Grace's eyes glistened. And what happens when he gets bored of you? Sienna laughed softly. Oh, honey, he already is. The words hit like glass. Grace staggered, one hand on her belly. A murmur rippled through the guests. Ethan, still on stage, looked down and frowned, not in concern but annoyance. Grace, he called out, his tone sharp. Stop making a scene. Her face went pale. The room spun. Lydia shouted her name, pushing through the crowd, and just as Grace's knees began to give way again, a deep commanding voice boomed from the doorway. Enough. The music stopped mid-note. Guests turned toward the entrance. A tall man in a black overcoat stood framed by the chandelier's light. Silver hair, eyes of steel. Grace's father. And in that suspended second, every secret, every lie, every cruel word Ethan had spoken began to tremble. Because judgment had finally arrived. The word enough cracked through the ballroom like thunder. Conversations died mid-sentence. The violinist stopped playing. Even the champagne bubbles seemed to pause in their glasses. Every head turned toward the grand entrance of the Plaza Hotel's ballroom. There stood Charles Whitmore, one of the most elusive billionaires in America, tall, silver-haired, and wrapped in a presence that made powerful men forget how to breathe. His tailored black overcoat gleamed faintly under the chandeliers, and behind him, two security agents from Whitmore Systems moved like shadows. Ethan Vale's face went pale. His hands clenched at his sides. Mr. Whitmore, he stammered, forcing a thin smile. I didn't expect. You didn't, Charles interrupted, his voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. Because you thought you could humiliate my daughter without consequence. A stunned murmur spread across the crowd. His daughter? Cameras rose, guests gasped, the whispers turned electric. Everyone had known Grace Whitmore as the quiet, gentle wife. No one had realized she was the heir to one of the largest tech fortunes in the country. Grace, still trembling, stood frozen a few feet away. Dad, she whispered, her voice cracking. Charles crossed the room in measured steps. His eyes didn't leave Ethan's face. Grace, he said softly, extending a hand. Come here. She hesitated, tears filling her eyes. For months, she had hidden her last name, her bloodline, thinking it made her love story purer. Now, seeing her father's face, furious yet full of worry, she realized the cost of her silence. When she reached him, Charles pulled her gently to his side, his hand protective over her shoulder. You're bleeding, he said under his breath. I'm fine, she lied. He turned to Lydia, who had rushed over. Call Dr. Patel, now, and have my car ready. Lydia nodded, dialing immediately. Ethan tried to regain his composure, stepping forward with a forced smile. Mr. Whitmore, sir, this is a misunderstanding. Grace has been, well, emotional lately. Pregnancy hormones, you know. Finish that sentence, Charles said, his tone like frost. I dare you. Ethan froze. Sienna Brooks stepped in quickly, clutching Ethan's arm. Mr. Whitmore, she said, voice trembling, this is all a big mistake. Grace attacked me. I just defended myself. Lydia spun around, holding up her phone. That's a lie. I recorded the whole thing. Every guest in this room saw you strike her. Gasps rippled again. A few guests lowered their cameras, uneasy now about the videos they'd been filming for gossip. Charles turned to the hotel manager, who stood near the stage, petrified. You will release all CCTV footage from tonight to my legal team within the hour. Yes, Mr. Whitmore, the man stammered. Ethan's calm shattered. You can't just barge in here and... I can, Charles cut him off, and I just did. He stepped closer, his voice dropping low enough that only Ethan could hear. You built your empire on deceit and arrogance. You thought my daughter was weak. You laughed when she bled, and you made the mistake of thinking no one would notice. Ethan's jaw tensed. She never told me who she really was. She lied. No, Charles said coldly. She protected you, and you used her kindness as a weapon. Grace clutched her father's sleeve. Dad, please, not here. I just want to leave. Charles softened slightly, brushing her hair from her face. You'll never have to see this man again. He nodded to his security team. Two men stepped forward. The room fell silent again as they positioned themselves beside Ethan. Sienna gasped. You can't do this? This is assault. Charles looked at her, unimpressed. Assault? He repeated. You should know, Miss Brooks. There's a police unit already on its way, and they'll be very interested in the video evidence. Ethan's confident mask crumbled completely. You'll ruin me, he hissed. Charles smiled faintly. No, Ethan, you ruined yourself. I'm just here to make sure it's public. He turned toward the crowd, his arms still around Grace. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this interruption. The event is over. My daughter requires medical care. As he led Grace toward the exit, the crowd parted again. This time in reverence, not gossip. Cameras stayed low. Even the chandeliers seemed dimmer. Ethan stood frozen on the stage, watching his empire begin to crumble in real time. And as the golden doors closed behind Charles Whitmore and his daughter, everyone in that room understood one thing. Power wasn't loud. It was silent, precise, and merciless when it finally struck. The black Mercedes Maybach glided through the Manhattan night, its tinted windows reflecting streaks of city light. Inside, the atmosphere was thick with silence. Grace Whitmore sat in the back seat beside her father, her trembling hands pressed over her belly. Lydia sat opposite, watching her pulse closely, her phone still buzzing from notifications. Videos of the gala already spreading like wildfire. Charles Whitmore's jaw was tight, his voice low. The doctor will meet us at the townhouse. I've already called your security detail in Palo Alto. You're leaving New York tomorrow. Grace's eyes filled with tears. Dad, please. No, he said sharply, then paused, seeing the way she flinched. His tone softened. You need rest, not headlines. But if I leave now, Grace whispered, he'll twist the story. He'll make it look like I'm unstable. Charles turned his gaze toward the window, watching skyscrapers blur past. He can't twist what the world already saw. Lydia lifted her phone and showed the trending tag, the Plaza Slap. The video had hit over 500,000 views in an hour. The comments were furious, demanding justice for Grace Whitmore. One read, "She's pregnant," and he laughed. "Lock him up." Grace winced. "I didn't want this kind of attention." "You didn't choose it," Lydia said softly. "They did." The car slowed to a stop outside the Whitmore townhouse on East 74th Street. Guards were already stationed at the gates, journalists flashing cameras from across the street. Charles stepped out first, commanding presence, cutting through the noise. "No statements tonight," he told the reporters coldly. "There will be legal action. That's all you need to know." Inside, the warmth of the townhouse wrapped around Grace like a blanket. The faint scent of jasmine from her late mother's garden still lingered in the air. She hadn't been here in over a year. As Lydia helped her sit on the couch, Charles poured a glass of water, setting it beside her. "I failed you," he said quietly. Grace shook her head. "No, I failed myself. I thought love meant staying quiet. Charles sat across from her, his face shadowed. Grace, when your mother died, I made a promise to protect you from men like Ethan Vale. Arrogant, ambitious, hollow. I saw it in his eyes the first time he shook my hand. Grace smiled sadly. You always see everything. Not this. Not the blood on my daughter's dress. Her hand moved to her stomach again. The baby kicked earlier, she said faintly. Maybe it means we're okay. Lydia crouched beside her. The baby's strong. You just need rest. Charles rose and spoke into his phone. Find out which firms still work with Ethan Vale. I want his accounts frozen by morning. His voice was steel now. No one humiliates my family and walks away rich. Grace's eyes widened. Dad, don't destroy him like that. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. He already destroyed himself. I'm just clearing the wreckage. Meanwhile, across town in the penthouse Ethan once called home, chaos erupted. Dozens of missed calls, his investors withdrawing one by one. Sienna Brooks sat on the couch scrolling through social media, panic rising. It's everywhere, she said, her voice shaking. They're calling you a monster. Ethan grabbed the phone and slammed it onto the counter. It'll blow over. I'll spin it. Say she overreacted, that it's a smear campaign. Sienna stared at him. You don't get it. That's Charles Whitmore's daughter. The man owns half the tech companies in the country. You're done. He shot her a glare. Not if I can get to the press first. Sienna hesitated. And say what? That your pregnant wife faked a breakdown while bleeding on the floor? For the first time, Ethan didn't answer. He just stared out at the Manhattan skyline, the lights reflecting in his glass of whiskey like sparks of a life burning out. Back at the townhouse, Grace lay on the couch, her eyes heavy but restless. Her father stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear, orchestrating silent retribution. Lydia dimmed the lights, whispering, Sleep, honey. Let him fight for you now. And as the city outside buzzed with the scandal of the year, Grace's last thought before sleep was not anger. It was relief. For the first time in years, she wasn't the one defending herself. Justice had finally picked a side. When Grace Whitmore woke up the next morning, sunlight was pouring through the tall windows of her father's townhouse. For a moment, she forgot everything. The slap, the blood, the humiliation. Then the memory crashed back like a cold wave. The sound that replayed in her head wasn't the slap, it was Ethan's laughter. That sharp, dismissive laugh that told her she was nothing. She sat up slowly, one hand over her stomach. The baby kicked gently, alive, resilient. Lydia entered quietly with a tray of oatmeal and tea. How are you feeling? She asked. Grace managed a faint smile. Like I survived a war. Lydia sat beside her. You did, and the world knows it. She turned her phone toward Grace. The headlines were everywhere. CEO Ethan Vale publicly humiliates pregnant wife. The Plaza scandal. Billionaire's daughter attacked by husband's mistress. Grace's heart sank as she scrolled through the articles. The comments were relentless. People choosing sides, dissecting her life. They're making it entertainment, she whispered. That's what they do, Lydia said gently. But you don't need to hide anymore. Downstairs, Charles Whitmore's voice carried through the hall, steady and authoritative. Freeze all joint accounts. Suspend every line of credit tied to Vale developments. I want an emergency hearing by this afternoon. Grace descended the staircase slowly, clutching the railing. Dad, she said softly, please, don't turn this into revenge. Charles turned toward her, his expression unreadable. Revenge? No. This is protection. You gave that man trust and he used it to humiliate you. I'm only returning the favor, with interest. Destroying him won't change what happened, Grace said. He approached her, voice firm. But it will make sure it never happens again. Lydia stepped between them gently. She needs rest, not another battle. Charles exhaled and nodded. You're right. Then looking at Grace, he added softly, but when you've been a father long enough, you stop waiting for justice to come. You build it yourself. Across the city, Ethan Vale's empire was already crumbling. News networks looped the viral clip, the slap, Grace's fall, his laughter. His investors vanished overnight. His office voicemail was flooded with cancellations. In his penthouse, Ethan paced like a trapped animal. It's just a PR storm, he muttered. I can fix it. Sienna Brooks stood by the window, scrolling through her phone. You can't fix a reputation that's dead, she said flatly. He glared at her. You don't understand business. I understand survival. she snapped, and yours is over. Everyone's distancing themselves. Even the board wants you out. Ethan snatched the phone from her hand and read the message she'd received. Whitmore Industries now owns controlling shares in Vale Developments. His face drained of color. He bought me out? Sienna smirked slightly. No, he bought you. There's a difference. Ethan's breath came heavy. He can't do this. Oh, he can, Sienna said. And he already did. The media, the money, the narrative, it's all his now. Ethan hurled a glass at the wall, shards scattering across the marble floor. She planned this, he spat. Grace played the victim perfectly. Sienna crossed her arms. You hit rock bottom, and you still blame her? She's the one carrying your child, and you laughed while she bled. Don't you start, he growled. But Sienna didn't back down. You think she's weak, Ethan? Watch what happens when a woman like her decides she's done protecting you. Meanwhile, back at the townhouse, Grace sat near the window, gazing out at Central Park. Her reflection in the glass was calm but unfamiliar. She'd spent so long being quiet, obedient, forgiving. Now the silence inside her was something new. It was power. Her father entered quietly, holding a folder. Divorce papers, he said. I've arranged everything. You just have to sign. Grace looked at the pen resting atop the pages. It was the same kind her father used to sign billion-dollar deals. Heavy, elegant, decisive. She took a deep breath and picked it up. Do you think he'll ever understand what he lost? Charles's gaze softened. No. Men like Ethan only understand what they can't replace. Grace signed her name. The sound of the pen against paper felt like a door closing forever. Lydia smiled faintly. How does it feel? Grace set the pen down. It feels like the laughter finally stopped. And outside, as the headlines kept spinning, Ethan Vale's empire crumbled one deal at a time, proof that karma doesn't rush. It waits, then strikes with precision. 2 days after the gala, Manhattan still hadn't stopped talking. Every news channel, podcast, and gossip page dissected the Plaza incident. Grace Whitmore's face was everywhere. Photos of her crying, of Ethan Vale standing frozen, of Sienna Brooks hiding behind her champagne glass. The internet had already chosen its villain. But what the world didn't yet know was that the story was about to get even darker. Grace sat in her father's home office, sunlight reflecting off the glass walls. Charles Whitmore was on a video call with a team of lawyers, his tone calm but razor-sharp. I don't want a settlement, he said. I want accountability, financial, legal, public. One of the lawyers, a gray-haired man in a navy suit, nodded. Mr. Whitmore, the footage Lydia recorded has already been authenticated, but we also found something else. Security cameras from the plaza. They caught Ethan and Miss Brooks moments before the altercation. They were laughing, planning. Charles's eyes darkened. Send me the file. When the call ended, Grace hesitated. Dad, I don't want to drag this out. This isn't about dragging it out, he said quietly. It's about ending it right. Lydia entered holding a tablet. You should see this. She pressed play. The video began with Ethan and Sienna near the bar, their voices low, but the audio clear enough. She's coming tonight, right? Ethan, I told her to. She'll probably cry. Just keep it professional. Professional? Ethan, I'm not your PR stunt. If she acts out, I'll shut her down. Good. Just don't touch her. Cameras everywhere. Laughing. You think I care? Grace's stomach twisted. She had replayed that night in her mind over and over, wondering if it had been an accident. Now she knew. It wasn't. It had been deliberate humiliation. Charles placed a steady hand on her shoulder. They scripted your pain, he said softly. Tears welled in Grace's eyes. Then we end the show. Lydia looked up from her phone. There's more. The board of Vale Developments just released a statement. They've suspended Ethan as CEO. The shareholders are demanding a public apology. Charles smiled faintly, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. He won't apologize. Narcissists don't do humility. Across town, Ethan sat in his office surrounded by half-packed boxes. His phone buzzed nonstop. Lawyers, investors, journalists. Every notification felt like another nail in his career's coffin. Sienna stormed in, sunglasses covering her puffy eyes. The video's everywhere, she snapped. Do you realize what you've done? They're calling me your attack dog. Ethan glared. You were supposed to handle it, not ruin it. You told me to shut her down, she shot back. Now look at us. You've destroyed everything we worked for. He rose, slamming his fist on the desk. I built this. You were just decoration. Sienna froze, then laughed bitterly. You still think you're in control? Wake up, Ethan. Charles Whitmore owns your company now. You're nothing but an employee. He stared at her, disbelief morphing into panic. He can't. He already did, she interrupted. And tomorrow he's filing charges. For fraud, for assault, for emotional abuse. And guess what? I'm not going down with you. Ethan's face drained. What are you saying? I'm saying, Sienna whispered, pulling a flash drive from her purse. I recorded everything. Every call, every plan, every insult. And I've already sent it to his lawyers. Consider it my redemption. He lunged toward her, but she stepped back. You wanted a partner who could keep up, she said, smirking. Congratulations, I just outran you. She turned and walked out, leaving him alone with his shattered empire. That night, Grace stood by the window in her father's townhouse, watching snow begin to fall over Central Park. Lydia approached quietly. He's losing everything, she said. Grace nodded, her voice calm. Good. Maybe now he'll understand silence doesn't mean weakness. Charles entered the room, holding a folder. The DA's office wants your statement. Are you ready? Grace looked down at her swollen belly, feeling the baby kick softly. For the first time, she said, I am. And as the city slept under its blanket of snow, the evidence of Ethan Vale's cruelty spread like fire. Proof that no lie, no matter how polished, survives the truth forever. The next morning dawned gray and bitterly cold. Manhattan's skyline looked like steel against the winter fog, sharp, distant, merciless. Inside what remained of Vale Developments, the air felt the same. Desks were half empty, phones silent, and the once proud logo above the reception desk had been quietly removed overnight. Ethan Vale stormed through the corridor, coat flaring behind him. His assistant, a young man who'd once idolized him, avoided eye contact. Sir, he murmured, the board meeting starts in 5 minutes. Ethan's jaw clenched. They can wait for me. They owe me their jobs. But when he entered the boardroom, the room didn't stand for him anymore. The men and women who used to laugh at his jokes now looked away. At the head of the long glass table sat a familiar face, Charles Whitmore's legal representative, flanked by advisors. Mr. Vale, the lawyer said coolly, you no longer hold executive authority. Effective immediately, the company is under new management. Ethan laughed bitterly. You can't do this. This is my company. Correction, the lawyer said, adjusting his glasses. It was your company. Mr. Pass Whitmore acquired controlling interest yesterday. Your remaining shares are being liquidated to cover pending lawsuits. Ethan's chest tightened. You're bluffing. The lawyer slid a folder toward him. Inside were signatures. His own, forged by manipulation from a partner who had already turned against him. And at the very top, the letter of termination, bearing the company's official seal. For a long moment, Ethan didn't speak. Then he laughed again, low and hollow. So this is it. The mighty Charles Whitmore swoops in and takes everything. Typical billionaire justice. Justice, the lawyer replied evenly, isn't theft, it's balance. Ethan slammed the folder shut and rose. You'll regret this. You'll all regret this. He stormed out of the boardroom, ignoring the looks of pity or disgust from his former allies. His phone buzzed non-stop, but he didn't answer. He already knew what the messages said. When he reached the street, paparazzi were waiting. Ethan, did you really laugh while your pregnant wife was bleeding? Is it true your mistress assaulted her? Are you declaring bankruptcy? Their flashes blinded him. He shoved past them, muttering curses. One reporter shouted, Grace Whitmore's father just announced a women's protection fund in her name. Any comment? That stopped him cold. Across town, Grace and Charles were at a press conference streamed live from the Whitmore Foundation headquarters. Grace, still pale but composed, stood beside her father as he announced a new initiative, the Whitmore Women's Justice Fund, dedicated to supporting victims of domestic and emotional abuse. The strength of one woman, Charles said to the cameras, has already changed this conversation. Now we make sure no woman ever suffers in silence again. Grace took the microphone, her voice steady. Silence is the abuser's favorite language. I was silent for too long. But when someone laughs at your pain, when they call your tears drama, that's not love. That's control. And it ends now. The applause was thunderous. Online, the clip spread faster than the scandal that birthed it. Hashtags shifted from outrage to admiration. Grace Whitmore strong and justice speaks. Ethan watched it on his phone from a nearby cafe, bitterness eating at him like acid. Sienna Brooks entered quietly, wearing sunglasses and a heavy coat. She didn't sit, she just placed an envelope on the table. "What's this?" he muttered. "My immunity deal," she said. "The DA offered me leniency for cooperating. You should probably get a lawyer who isn't hiding from reporters." He scoffed. "You sold me out." "No," she replied, voice cold. "You sold yourself out the night you laughed." She walked away, leaving him alone with the envelope and his reflection in the cafe window. A broken man in a city that had already forgotten him. Hours later, as night fell, the TV in the corner played the news again. Ethan Vale officially charged with financial fraud and aggravated assault. Bail denied. The patrons barely glanced up. The fall of a golden man wasn't shocking anymore. It was just another headline. And somewhere across the city, Grace watched the same report, her hand resting on her belly, whispering, "It's over." But Lydia, sitting beside her, shook her head gently. "No, Grace," she said, "it's only just beginning, because now the world listens when you speak." And for the first time, Grace smiled, not out of revenge but out of peace. Her silence had turned into power, and her pain had become purpose. It was early spring when Grace Whitmore finally stepped outside without fear. The air in Manhattan carried a hint of warmth, the kind that made the city hum again after winter's silence. For months, she had lived quietly in her father's townhouse. Doctor visits, therapy sessions, court hearings, all while her story continued to echo through headlines and talk shows. But this morning was different. She wasn't a headline anymore. She was just Grace, walking down Fifth Avenue in a long beige coat, one hand on her rounded belly. She was 8 months pregnant now. Her steps were slow, careful, but her spirit felt lighter. At a nearby Starbucks, she met Lydia for their usual tea. "You're glowing," Lydia said with a smile as they sat by the window. Grace laughed softly. "That's the polite way of saying I look huge." "No," Lydia said gently. "That's the way of saying you survived." Grace looked outside at the stream of people moving past. "I didn't think I would," she admitted. "There were nights I wished I could disappear. The humiliation, the noise, the pity, it was too much. But somehow, I'm still here." Lydia reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "You're not just here. You're changing things. Do you know how many women have written to the foundation? Hundreds. You gave them a voice." Grace's eyes softened. "Maybe that's what I was meant to do all along." Across the city, Ethan Vale's trial was beginning. Cameras crowded the courthouse steps, reporters shouting questions about the once golden CEO turned public disgrace. Grace didn't watch the live coverage. She didn't need to. Justice was already in motion, and for the first time, she didn't crave revenge, only closure. That afternoon, she met her father in his office at Whitmore Systems. The floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline like a painting. Charles stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him. "You've been quiet today," he said without turning around. Grace smiled faintly. "You always notice." "I have eyes everywhere," he replied, then finally faced her. "You know, your mother would have been proud of you. She had the same fire, gentle but unstoppable." Grace's throat tightened. "I wish she could see this." "She does," Charles said softly. "Every time you walk through a storm and keep your head high, she sees it." They shared a long silence. Grace finally asked, "Do you think people will ever stop seeing me as the woman who got slapped in public?" Charles stepped closer. "No," he said honestly. "But that's not a curse, it's a symbol. You turned humiliation into courage. That's something the world doesn't forget easily." Grace nodded slowly. "Then I'll live with it, maybe even use it." Later that week, Grace appeared at a conference for the Whitmore Women's Justice Fund. The ballroom was filled with journalists, activists, and survivors. She stood at the podium in a simple white dress, no designer label, no glamour, just grace, in every sense of the word. Months ago, she began, her voice clear. "I was broken. I believed silence was strength. I thought if I endured long enough, love would return. But silence didn't save me. It buried me. Speaking out saved me. It saves us all." The room was silent, every word hanging heavy and true. "Forgiveness," she continued, "isn't weakness. It's choosing not to let pain define you. I don't hate the man who hurt me. I pity him, because he'll never know the peace that comes with truth." When she finished, the audience rose to its feet. The applause was thunderous, genuine, a sound not of sympathy but of respect. Backstage, Lydia hugged her tightly. "You did it," she whispered. Grace smiled through tears. "No," she said softly. "We did it." Outside, snowflakes began to fall again, soft and slow, the last remnants of winter bowing to spring. Grace looked up at the sky, one hand resting on her belly. "For you," she murmured to her unborn child. "For every woman who thought she had to stay quiet, we rise." And as the applause echoed behind her, Grace Whitmore didn't just walk out of her past, she walked into her rebirth, radiant, unbroken, and finally free. The courthouse on Center Street was a fortress of gray stone, cold and echoing with history. Cameras lined the entrance as reporters shouted over one another, flashes bursting like lightning. It was the most anticipated trial of the year, the state versus Ethan Vale. Inside, Grace Whitmore sat in the witness waiting room, her belly now heavy with the final month of pregnancy. Lydia sat beside her, holding her hand. "You don't have to do this today," Lydia whispered. "You've already won." Grace shook her head slowly. "Not until I tell the truth. Not just for me, for every woman who couldn't." When her name was called, the courtroom doors swung open. Every eye turned toward her. Ethan Vale, seated beside his lawyer, straightened in his chair. His once perfect hair was unkempt, his eyes rimmed with sleepless nights. He looked nothing like the confident CEO who had laughed at her pain. Grace took the stand. The air felt heavier than she expected. The prosecutor smiled gently. "Mrs. Whitmore, please tell the court what happened on the night of December 18th. Grace swallowed, her voice trembling only slightly. "We were at the Plaza Hotel for a fundraising gala. Ethan brought his assistant, Sienna Brooks. I was 7 months pregnant. When I approached them, she slapped me, in front of everyone." The courtroom was silent, except for the faint scratching of pens. "What did Mr. Vale do?" the prosecutor asked. Grace's eyes met Ethan's. He looked away. "He laughed," she said quietly. "He laughed while I bled." A murmur rippled through the audience. Ethan's lawyer jumped up. "Objection. Emotional speculation." The judge raised a hand. "Overruled." "Continue, Mrs. Whitmore." Grace nodded. "I begged him for help, and he did nothing. I thought I was losing my baby. I remember thinking, this is how it ends. But then," she smiled faintly, her eyes glistening, "my father walked in, and for the first time, I wasn't alone." The prosecutor projected a video on the courtroom screen, Lydia's recording. Gasps filled the room as the sound echoed. The slap, the laughter, the silence that followed. Grace closed her eyes briefly. It wasn't pain she felt anymore. It was closure. The prosecutor turned toward the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is not a marriage gone wrong. This is cruelty, broadcasted and denied. No woman should have to earn her husband's humanity." Ethan's lawyer tried to fight back. "My client is a victim of public persecution. He never intended harm." The prosecutor smirked. "Intent doesn't erase humiliation. Laughter doesn't wash away blood." When it was Ethan's turn to testify, his arrogance flickered like a dying flame. "It was a misunderstanding," he said, forcing a calm tone. "Grace overreacted. The media twisted everything." "Do you deny laughing while your wife, 7 months pregnant, was struck?" the prosecutor asked. He hesitated. "I didn't mean it that way." "Then what way did you mean it, Mr. Vale?" Ethan had no answer. His silence spoke louder than his lies ever could. Outside, the world watched. Millions streamed the trial live. Hashtags flooded social media again. "Justice for Grace," and "the laughter ends here." After hours of testimony, the jury returned. The forewoman stood, voice steady. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Ethan Vale, guilty on all charges: fraud, assault, and emotional abuse." The courtroom erupted. Grace covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Lydia hugged her tightly, whispering, "It's over, Grace. It's really over." Ethan's face collapsed into disbelief. He tried to stand, shouting, "You think this changes anything? I made you." But the judge's gavel slammed down. "Enough." Security moved in. As they cuffed him, the cameras zoomed in on his face. A man who had built his life on power, now stripped of every ounce of it. Grace stood, breathing deeply. "No, Ethan," she said softly. "You didn't make me. You broke me. And I built myself back." The words cut through the noise, landing like truth too sharp to deny. Outside the courthouse, sunlight broke through the clouds for the first time in days. Grace stepped into it, her coat billowing, her belly round, her head held high, and as the press shouted her name, she didn't flinch. The trial was over, but the rebirth of Grace Whitmore had only just begun. The verdict echoed in Ethan Vale's ears long after the courtroom emptied. Guilty. One word that had destroyed the empire he'd spent years building. He sat in a holding cell beneath the courthouse, the walls closing in on him. His tailored suit was rumpled, his hands shaking. For the first time in his adult life, no one answered when he called. No lawyers, no investors, no Sienna. Just silence. Upstairs, Grace Whitmore sat in a private conference room with Lydia and her father. The DA had offered her one final meeting with Ethan if she wanted closure before sentencing. Her father objected. "You owe him nothing," Charles said firmly. Grace stared out the window. "I don't owe him," she said softly. "But I need to see him one last time to end it my way." Charles hesitated. Then he nodded once. "I'll be waiting outside." The guards escorted Grace down the narrow hallway. Every step echoed off the tile. She clutched her belly protectively. Her baby's heartbeat, the only rhythm that steadied her. When she entered the small interrogation room, Ethan was already there, his wrists chained to the table. His eyes lifted slowly, bloodshot, desperate. He tried to smile. "Grace," he whispered, voice hoarse. "You look different." She sat across from him. "I am different." For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the fluorescent light filled the space between them. "I never meant for things to go that far," he said finally. "You know me. You know I lose my temper, the pressure, the stress." "Don't," she interrupted quietly. "Don't turn cruelty into circumstance. You laughed, Ethan, while I bled." He swallowed hard. "I made mistakes, but I loved you, Grace. I still do." Her eyes didn't waver. "You loved control. You loved being admired. You loved the image of us until the image cracked." Ethan leaned forward, his chains clinking softly. "If you'd just given me another chance to humiliate me," she said sharply. "Another chance to make me feel small?" He winced. "I lost everything." Grace's voice softened, not out of pity, but truth. "No, Ethan, you lost everyone who saw through you. That's not everything, that's karma." His face twisted in bitterness. "You think you won because of your father's money? Without him, you'd still be nobody." She smiled faintly. "Maybe, but at least I'd still be human. You sold your soul long before you sold your company." Ethan's gaze darkened. "You'll regret this. The world moves on. Scandals fade." Grace stood, calm and poised. "Not this one, because it's not just mine anymore. Every woman who saw what you did, every woman who's ever been silenced, won't forget, and neither will your child." His head snapped up. "My child?" She looked at him steadily. "Our child, yes, but he'll never carry your name." The words hit harder than the verdict. Ethan's shoulders slumped, the last trace of arrogance fading from his face. "You can't erase me," he said weakly. Grace leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "I already have." She turned toward the door, her hand on her stomach, her posture regal despite the pain. "Grace," he called after her. "Wait, please, just tell me one thing. Why didn't you fight back that night? Why didn't you slap her back?" She paused, her back still to him. "Because I don't fight in the mud, Ethan. I rebuild above it." She walked out without looking back. The door shut with a heavy click. Outside, her father stood waiting. "Did you get what you needed?" he asked. Grace exhaled. "Yes, I saw the end of him." Charles placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "No," he said softly, "you saw the beginning of you." As they stepped out into the sunlight, the courthouse behind them seemed smaller, almost insignificant. Grace looked up at the sky, feeling the wind brush against her face. The past was gone. The chains that once held her, fear, guilt, shame, were gone with it. And as the city moved on, Grace Whitmore walked forward, free, unafraid, and stronger than every man who ever thought her silence meant surrender. The night of the storm arrived without warning. Manhattan was soaked in cold rain, thunder rolling across the skyline. Inside Charles Whitmore's townhouse, the lights glowed warm against the darkness, but the air was tense. Grace Whitmore was in labor. Lydia rushed through the hallway shouting to the doctor, "She's contracting again." 3 minutes apart. Grace gripped the edge of the hospital bed they'd brought into her father's home, sweat glistening on her forehead. "It's too early," she gasped. "He's not supposed to come yet." Dr. Patel, calm and steady, adjusted the monitors. "He's ready, Grace. You've been through worse. Breathe." Charles stood frozen near the doorway, helpless for the first time in years. "Shouldn't she be in a hospital?" he barked. "She's safer here," Lydia said firmly. No reporters, no cameras, no chaos. Grace clutched her belly as another wave of pain hit. Her mind spun, flashes of the past year flickering like lightning. Ethan's laughter, the courtroom, her father's steady hand. Every moment of pain had led to this. And now, in the middle of a thunderstorm, she was about to bring new life into a world that had nearly broken her. She cried out, tears streaming, but this time it wasn't despair, it was power. Almost there, Dr. Patel said. One more push. Outside, thunder cracked, shaking the windows, and then silence, followed by the softest cry. Lydia's voice trembled. It's a boy. Grace collapsed back against the pillow, sobbing and laughing at once. Dr. Patel placed the baby in her arms. Tiny, pink, alive. She traced her finger over his cheek, her heart swelling. "Hi," she whispered. "You made it." Charles stepped closer, his stoic face melting into awe. "He's beautiful," he murmured. Grace smiled through tears. "Meet your grandson, Dad." For a long moment the room was silent, except for the newborn's quiet breaths. Charles reached out a trembling hand, touching the baby's head. "You'll never have to fight the battles your mother did," he said softly. Grace looked up at him. "No," she said, her voice firm. "He'll learn to fight for others instead." Hours passed. The rain eased, turning into a gentle drizzle against the windows. Grace held her son close, rocking him slowly. Lydia cleaned up the room, humming under her breath, the storm now a memory. Charles brought in a small velvet box and set it beside the bed. "This was your mother's," he said. Inside lay a silver locket engraved with delicate initials. Grace opened it and saw a tiny photograph, her mother smiling, holding her as a baby. "I thought this was gone," Grace whispered. "I kept it," Charles said. "I wanted you to have it when you found your strength again. I think you've more than earned it." Grace smiled faintly, fastening the locket around her neck. "They'll know her through me," she said, glancing at her baby. "Through us." Later that night, after everyone had gone to rest, Grace sat alone by the window. The city below shimmered with new life. She cradled her son, whispering softly, "You don't know it yet, but you saved me. You reminded me that pain isn't the end, it's the beginning." She looked down at his peaceful face, so small, so unaware of the world's cruelty. "I'll protect you," she promised, "not by hiding you from the world, but by teaching you what love really is." In the distance, sirens wailed faintly, blending with the hum of the city. Grace leaned her head against the chair, eyes heavy but heart lighter than it had been in years. Lydia entered quietly, a smile spreading across her face. "He's perfect," she whispered. Grace nodded. "He is, and I'll make sure he grows up knowing that strength isn't loud. It's quiet, patient, and kind." Outside, the clouds began to part, and the first hint of dawn touched the skyline. Grace looked up, whispering a final vow. "He'll never inherit your shadow, Ethan, only my light." And as the sun rose over Manhattan, Grace Whitmore, the woman who once fell under the weight of cruelty, rose with it, reborn as a mother, a survivor, and a symbol of hope for every soul who had ever been told to stay silent. A month after her son's birth, spring had finally claimed Manhattan. The city thawed, blooming with color and noise again. Grace Whitmore walked slowly through Central Park, the stroller gliding before her. The sun was soft on her face, the world quieter than it had been in a long time. Her baby, Liam, slept peacefully, wrapped in a pale blue blanket. For the first time in years, Grace felt the simple joy of existing without fear. No flashing cameras, no cruel whispers, no Ethan Vale shadowing her peace. Yet beneath that calm, something still stirred. A lingering question, the ghost of a truth she hadn't dared to face. Lydia met her on a park bench, 2 coffees in hand. "You look like you're finally breathing again," she said warmly. Grace smiled faintly. "I am, but sometimes I wake up wondering if it's really over, if he's really gone." Lydia handed her a cup. "He's gone, Grace. He's in a federal prison in upstate New York. The only thing he'll ever see of you now is your name in headlines about your foundation." Grace looked down at her son. "Then maybe I can finally stop running." They sat in comfortable silence, the breeze carrying the laughter of children nearby. Then Lydia reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "This came this morning," she said quietly. Grace frowned. "From who?" "His lawyer." Her pulse quickened. She hesitated before taking it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a handwritten letter in Ethan's familiar slanted script. "Grace, by now, you've heard that my appeal failed. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I think you should know the truth before you close this chapter forever. Sienna didn't just work for me. She was paid by one of my competitors to ruin me, to leak documents, to make the scandal explode. I thought I was in control. I wasn't. You were right about everything. I built an empire on lies and it swallowed me whole. There's one thing you should believe, though. I did love you. Maybe not the right way, but I did. And I hope one day our son knows I wasn't just a monster. Tell him I tried to change, even if I failed. Ethan Grace read the letter twice. Her heart didn't race, it didn't break. It simply went still. He's still trying to rewrite the story, she murmured. Lydia nodded slowly. Do you want me to shred it? Grace folded the letter neatly and tucked it back into the envelope. No. He can have his words, but my son will never have his excuses. That evening, back at the townhouse, Grace sat in the nursery watching Liam sleep. The letter lay on the table beside her, untouched. She thought about what Ethan had written, about control, about love twisted into possession. Her father entered quietly, holding a glass of water. Lydia told me about the letter, he said. Grace nodded. He says he loved me. Charles sat beside her. Maybe he did, in his way. But broken men love like storms, loud, destructive, and temporary. Real love builds. It doesn't burn. Grace leaned her head against his shoulder. I used to wonder what I did wrong. He smiled gently. You believed. That's never wrong. They sat in silence for a while, watching the rise and fall of Liam's tiny chest. The baby stirred, a soft coo escaping his lips. Grace reached down, brushing her finger against his hand. I want him to grow up knowing truth, not revenge, she said. I want him to learn that love doesn't hurt, that silence isn't safety, that kindness isn't weakness. Charles nodded. He will. Because he has you. Later that night, Grace burned the letter in the fireplace. The flames curled the edges of Ethan's handwriting, consuming every lie until nothing but ashes remained. She whispered into the fire, "Goodbye, Ethan." Then she turned to the window, where the city lights shimmered like distant stars. Liam stirred in his crib, and Grace smiled softly. For the first time, the past no longer haunted her. It bowed to her. And the truth, once her prison, had finally become her freedom. Summer arrived in Manhattan with golden skies and a new rhythm of life. The Whitmore townhouse, once heavy with silence and grief, now buzzed with laughter. Baby Liam had turned 3 months old, and his giggles filled the air like music. Grace Whitmore, once a name whispered with pity, had become a symbol of resilience. Her story was no longer about pain. It was about power. Every morning, she walked through Central Park with Liam in his stroller, greeting familiar faces, people who smiled, not out of curiosity but admiration. The world had changed how it saw her. Yet the real change was inside her. At the Whitmore Women's Justice Fund office, Grace stood by the window, watching volunteers sort through letters from women across the country. Some were handwritten, some printed from shelters or prisons, all carrying the same message: you gave me courage. Lydia entered, holding a tablet. You've been invited to speak at the Global Women's Summit in Los Angeles next month, she said. They want you to open the event. Grace blinked. Me? I'm not a politician or a celebrity. You're something better, Lydia said, smiling. You're proof. Grace hesitated, glancing at her son's photo on her desk. If I go, I'll have to take Liam. I don't want to leave him yet. Then take him, Lydia said simply. Let the world see what healing looks like. That evening, Grace discussed it with her father over dinner. Charles Whitmore, usually stoic, was quietly proud. You've done more for this family's name than I ever did, he said. Grace laughed softly. You built an empire, Dad. And you built something greater, he said. A legacy of compassion. She smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Mom would have liked that. Charles's expression softened. She would have been in the front row. Days passed quickly. Grace balanced motherhood and leadership with a calm she'd never known before. The headlines had moved on, the gossip vanished, but she remained a constant symbol in quiet corners of the internet. Articles titled How Grace Whitmore Turned Scandal into Strength and From Betrayal to Purpose, the woman who changed everything. Still, she never let the attention consume her. Fame wasn't the goal. Healing was. One evening, as she prepared for her upcoming trip, Lydia found her on the balcony, watching the Manhattan skyline. You ever think about him? Lydia asked softly. Grace didn't turn. Sometimes, she admitted. Not with anger anymore. Just acceptance. He's a part of the story that taught me who I really am. Lydia smiled. You sound like someone who's finally free. Grace looked out at the city lights, her voice steady. I am. When the day of her speech arrived, the auditorium in Los Angeles overflowed with thousands of people. The air buzzed with anticipation as Grace stepped on stage wearing a simple cream dress. She held no notes. Her only accessory was the silver locket around her neck. Her mother's. Good morning, she began, her voice calm but commanding. A year ago, I was defined by a slap, by humiliation, by silence. But what no one saw was the rebirth that followed. Pain doesn't end you, it introduces you to yourself. The crowd hung on every word. I stand here today not as a victim, she continued, but as a woman who learned that strength doesn't roar, it endures. And endurance is louder than cruelty. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, but this time, Grace didn't flinch. The spotlight no longer felt like exposure. It felt like purpose. Backstage, Lydia hugged her. You were brilliant. Grace smiled, holding Liam in her arms. No, she said softly, we were. That night, back at the hotel, she stood by the window overlooking the city of angels, her son asleep beside her. The moonlight cast a soft glow across her face. She whispered to the sleeping child, you'll grow up knowing that pain doesn't define us, it refines us, that forgiveness is strength and truth is freedom. Outside, fireworks lit the sky in celebration of the summit's closing ceremony. Grace watched them burst into color, her reflection shimmering against the glass. And in that quiet, glowing moment, Grace Whitmore knew. Her story was no longer about survival. It was about legacy. And this was only the beginning. The morning sun hit the marble lobby of the Whitmore Tower like liquid gold, but inside the tension was ice cold. Grace stepped out of the elevator, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. She wasn't here as someone's ex-wife anymore. She was the new CEO of Whitmore Enterprises, the company her father had just handed over to her. The media outside was a frenzy of flashing cameras, but she walked through them like a storm with perfect control. Lydia was beside her, holding a folder. Are you sure about this? She asked softly. Grace nodded. It's time they see who I really am. In the conference room, the board members murmured among themselves. Men who had once ignored her now stared with unease. At the head of the table sat one man who didn't belong there, but had managed to slip in anyway. Ethan Vale, dressed in prison gray, escorted by 2 guards. He'd been granted permission to attend remotely via a screen, but somehow he'd convinced his lawyers to bring him in person. Grace's eyes met his, calm but unflinching. Thank you for coming, she began, her voice steady. Today, we're announcing the rebranding of Whitmore Enterprises. It's no longer just a legacy, it's a statement. The presentation began. On the screen, images flashed. Charitable projects, women-led startups, scholarships for single mothers. This company, she said, will no longer serve greed. It will serve good. A murmur rippled across the room. Ethan's smirk twisted. Touching, he drawled. But don't pretend this is about justice. You're doing this to erase me. Grace's lips curved into a small smile. Ethan, I don't need to erase you. You did that yourself. The cameras caught everything. The guards shifted uncomfortably as Ethan's composure cracked. You think you've won because you've got a new title? Because your daddy gave you another throne? No, Grace said quietly, because I learned how to stand without one. The live feed broadcasted the moment across every business network. The comments exploded. Grace Whitmore owns the room. Ethan Vale's downfall is poetic justice. Then the twist came. Lydia handed Grace another document, sealed, official. Grace opened it and read aloud. This is an official partnership agreement between Whitmore Enterprises and the U.S. Department of Justice to establish the Vale Fund for Corporate Ethics. The board members gasped. Ethan's face turned pale. You used my name? He hissed. Grace met his eyes. Yes, because you'll finally do something good, even if it's by accident. Security stepped forward as the meeting ended. Ethan stood, trembling with rage. You'll regret this, he shouted. Grace's voice was soft but firm. No, Ethan, I already did. Now I'm done. As the guards led him out, flashes exploded from reporters waiting outside the building. Grace walked behind them, her head high. Someone shouted, Miss Whitmore, is it true your ex-husband tried to take credit for your projects? She paused, turned slightly toward the cameras, and said, He tried. But the truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to outlast the lies. That night, as the news played on every major network, Grace sat on her penthouse balcony, Liam asleep in her arms. The city glowed beneath her, alive and relentless. Lydia joined her with a cup of tea. "You did it," Lydia said. "You took back everything." Grace looked down at her son, smiling softly. "Not everything, just what was mine to begin with." Below, the giant digital billboard on Fifth Avenue flashed the new slogan of Whitmore Enterprises: power, purpose, redemption. And for the first time, Grace felt at peace. Not because she'd defeated her enemies, but because she'd rewritten the ending. A year later, spring sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the Whitmore Foundation's new headquarters in downtown Manhattan. Grace Whitmore stood on the rooftop garden, holding a cup of chamomile tea, watching the skyline stretch across the horizon. Her life looked nothing like it had a year ago. No courtrooms, no scandals, no fear. Only peace, purpose, and the laughter of her 1-year-old son, Liam, echoing down the hallway. Inside, the foundation buzzed with life. Dozens of staff worked on programs for women's shelters, scholarships, and therapy initiatives. Grace had transformed her trauma into an engine of change. She'd built something lasting, something that reached beyond her own pain. Lydia walked up beside her, tablet in hand. "We just got word," she said. "The Women's Justice Fund has been nominated for a National Humanitarian Award." Grace turned, surprised. "You're kidding," Lydia grinned. "Nope. They want you to attend the ceremony next month in D.C. The nomination is for courage in action." Grace smiled softly. "I never thought courage would come from falling apart." "That's exactly why it matters," Lydia said. "You didn't just survive, Grace. You rebuilt." They were interrupted by the sound of Liam's giggle. He toddled toward them, holding a stuffed giraffe. His curly hair bounced with every step. Grace scooped him up, kissing the top of his head. "You're getting too big for me to carry," she teased. Lydia smiled. "He's got your strength." "And his father's eyes," Grace said quietly, tracing the boy's cheek. Her voice didn't break anymore when she said it. There was no bitterness, no regret. Only calm acceptance. Later that afternoon, Grace met her father for lunch at the River Cafe overlooking the Brooklyn Bridge. The sunlight danced on the water, and Charles Whitmore looked 10 years younger. Retirement suited him. He raised his glass. "To peace," he said. Grace smiled. "To beginnings." Charles leaned back, watching his daughter. "You know, I used to think success was about power. But watching you, I see it's about impact. You've done more good in 1 year than I did in 30. Grace chuckled. "You gave me the tools. I just learned how to use them differently." He nodded. "You turned a wound into a weapon of compassion. That's rare." Their meal was interrupted by the waiter handing Grace an envelope. "This was delivered for you, Miss Whitmore." Grace frowned. The envelope was unmarked, the handwriting unfamiliar. She opened it slowly. Inside was a small card handwritten in neat script. "I saw your interview. You spoke about truth, about rebuilding. I've been in prison therapy for 6 months now. For the first time, I understand what I did. I'm not asking for forgiveness. Just thank you for making me face myself." Grace's hand trembled for a second, then she set the card down beside her plate. Charles watched her carefully. "Do you want me to handle it?" "No," she said softly. "There's nothing to handle." He studied her expression. "You're sure?" She nodded. "For the first time, I don't feel anger, just closure." Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of church bells from across the river. Grace stared out at the skyline. So much beauty, so much pain, and realized they could coexist. That was life, imperfect but forward-moving. Later that evening, she and Lydia hosted a small gala celebrating the Foundation's anniversary. Grace took the stage, her son in her arms, her father smiling proudly in the crowd. "I once thought silence was strength," she told the audience. "But now I know, speaking truth is stronger. Pain taught me how to rise, and love taught me how to stay standing." Applause filled the room. Cameras flashed, yet Grace didn't feel like she was in the spotlight anymore. She was the light. After the event, she stood by the window, watching the city she had once feared now glowing beneath her. Lydia joined her quietly. "You've come full circle," she said. Grace nodded, smiling down at Liam asleep in her arms. "No," she whispered. "This isn't a circle, it's a spiral. I'm not where I started. I'm higher." And as the lights of Manhattan flickered below, Grace Whitmore finally understood. True victory isn't about revenge or redemption. It's about peace. And she had found hers. The day of the award ceremony dawned clear and radiant over Washington, D.C. The sky was the kind of endless blue that only spring could bring, a promise, a cleansing. Grace Whitmore stood in front of the mirror in her hotel suite, fastening the silver locket around her neck. The same one her father had given her the night Liam was born. Inside was the photograph of her mother holding her as a baby. Now, Grace would walk into history carrying both of them close to her heart. Lydia entered, holding a folder. "Everything's ready. The Whitmore Women's Justice Fund has officially reached 10,000 beneficiaries. That's 10,000 women who've gotten legal help, therapy, or housing because of you." Grace turned, adjusting her earrings. "Because of us," she corrected. "Because we refused to stay silent." Lydia smiled. "You're about to receive an award from the president, Grace? You sure you still want to sound humble?" Grace laughed softly. "Humility isn't weakness, it's remembering where the pain started." At the National Arts Hall that evening, chandeliers glittered like frozen stars. The room was filled with senators, activists, CEOs, and journalists. But when Grace stepped onto the red carpet, all conversation seemed to stop. She wasn't just another public figure anymore. She was a symbol. A woman who had been broken, humiliated, and laughed at, yet had risen into her power with grace that silenced nations. Charles Whitmore walked beside her, looking proud but quiet. He leaned down and whispered, "Your mother would have said, make them remember your strength, not your scars." Grace smiled faintly. "Then I guess I'll do both." Inside, as the ceremony began, her story played on a massive screen. Clips from her speeches, footage of the courtroom, and moments from her foundation's work. The final image was of her holding baby Liam, sunlight streaming through the window behind her. The crowd rose to its feet before she even reached the stage. When the applause faded, Grace stood at the podium, taking a breath. "A year ago," she began, "I was known for a moment of humiliation, for a slap that was never just about pain, it was about power. But what I've learned since is this: power isn't what others give you. It's what you reclaim when no one believes in you." She paused, scanning the audience. "That night, I lost everything I thought defined me. My marriage, my dignity, my peace. But I found something greater. I found my voice. And with that voice, I found thousands of others who had been silenced just like me." Her tone softened. "Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means moving forward without carrying the poison. I don't hate the people who hurt me. They gave me the fire to build something bigger than myself." She looked toward the back of the room where Lydia stood, tears in her eyes. "To every woman watching tonight, remember this: you are not what happened to you. You are what you choose to become after." The hall erupted into thunderous applause. Cameras flashed. Some people cried openly. Later, as she left the stage, Charles met her with open arms. "You've done it," he said, his voice thick with pride. Grace smiled. "No, Dad. We did it. Mom, too." Outside the hall, night had fallen. The air was warm, filled with the faint hum of traffic and applause still echoing in the distance. Grace stepped into the courtyard where Lydia waited with Liam asleep in her arms. The baby stirred as Grace took him, holding him close under the moonlight. "Look at that," Lydia said softly, nodding toward the Capitol's lights in the distance. "That glow kind of looks like the start of something new." Grace kissed the top of Liam's head. "It is." She gazed up at the stars, whispering, "He'll grow up in a world where truth doesn't scare people anymore, where kindness isn't seen as weakness. That's the world I'll build for him." Charles placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice quiet but firm. "And you will, Grace, because you already changed this one." The wind stirred, soft and warm, carrying away the last shadows of her past. And as the night closed over Washington, Grace Whitmore, once a symbol of heartbreak, became something timeless, proof that even from ruin, greatness can rise, and that sometimes the loudest victory is living free. So, that's how the story ends. You're still here, aren't you? If you've stayed with me until this moment, then something in Grace's journey must have touched your heart in a quiet, personal way. Maybe it reminded you of your own storms, of the times you were laughed at, betrayed, or left standing alone, but still found the strength to rise again. This story isn't just about revenge or success, it's about healing. It's about learning, as the Stoics once taught, that what stands in the way becomes the way. Every pain, every fall, every humiliation, those weren't endings, they were beginnings in disguise. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind. not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Grace did exactly that. She stopped fighting for approval and started building peace within herself. So tonight, before you leave, I want you to remember this. Your silence can become your voice, your pain can become your purpose, and your story, yes, your story, can change lives too. If this journey moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Somewhere out there, someone needs this message, and maybe you will be the reason they find it.